you need to be willing to make the changes and do the work as well. But also when you're in a system that almost kind of rewards you just for doing nothing, you're really basically teaching people that you're fine where you are. Even if you're not doing that well, you're still like, okay.
I turned 50, y'all, and I started a podcast.
Really, age is just a number. It comes down to how we choose to live and the choices we make in our life, and those things accumulate.
Don't let the programming of life keep you from doing things every single day that make you happy.
When we feel good, it's easy to think good.
Life is not happening to you. You are your life. You are happening to your life. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Prynkiewicz. And Paris is a podcast host of Master Your Mental. She's a professional speaker for NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. She's a best-selling author of her memoir, Crooked Illness, Lessons from Inside and Outside Hospital Walls. And Paris has made it her mission to use her story to teach others how to shatter the mental health stigma and overcome their obstacles in order to begin to craft the life that they've always wanted to live. Hi, Paris.
Yes. Hey, Joanna. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Of course. I'm excited to talk with you.
Me too. I've spent the last 3 or 4 days reading your book.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait to see what your thoughts
Really?
are and how far where you're at in the story, because it's definitely a very different journey from like the two ends of what I kind of get into, of going in from, being hospitalized, struggling, getting this diagnosis, misdiagnosis, trying to figure everything out. And then, what does it look like to really put your mental health first, and what steps you have to take to even start that process. So
yeah,
it was definitely is a journey still.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the first way I was introduced to you. Our mutual friend, Ashley, mentioned you and said that she was going to your book launch, and she actually picked up a copy for me, and I hadn't read it at the time, but when I knew we were going to have this conversation, I went ahead and read it on my Kindle. I read the whole thing. And I mean, first and foremost, I am so impressed that you have taken, well, not just the book, but everything you're doing, but to write a book. You wrote this when you were 26. Was it last year you wrote this?
Yeah, 26.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's amazing. And, to not only be willing to share your story and write down your story, but to actually get it published and to be changing people's lives. And so I was really impressed with that, but nobody else probably that's going to be listening to this has read your book.
Thank
so
you.
Why don't you share a little bit about, a synopsis of what the book tells us about you and your struggle and your triumph, really?
Yeah, so the book is all about, it's basically a memoir of my story. So going into both ends of what it's like for me to have struggled with my mental health, going from being hospitalized, diagnosed with bipolar, and then actually going and finishing school, coming home, and then going back and working in the exact same hospital where I was a patient at. So being on two ends of the world there, right? So going into the world of, what it's like to be a patient in the hospital, and then that whole situation, and then really going back and then trying to help other people who are struggling and have been on that same similar journey that I was on. And it really taught me a lot about what it means to really get vulnerable and the beauty in that, because for so long I never actually thought that I would tell my story or talk much about that because of the stigma and different things associated with that. So not really wanting to get too much into detail, just, let me focus on you and what's going on with you and what can we do to try to help in some way. But what I was really neglecting was I wasn't able to help anyone really, because I was disconnected and like separated and not really didn't feel like I ever could do the work on myself. So I was really neglecting my own self in a sense, and just being like, let me just distract myself. And it was just a lot of distracting for a number of years. until I got into this conversation of, starting the podcast, meeting other people who also, and it's such a common thing now that you meet so many people who have some way, some connection of, whether it's someone that they work with or they know, or a family member or a friend who's either, think they've struggled with bipolar, or they've had a diagnosis and they know a little bit of their story. So I really feel like it's helped me to talk about it, to be able to hear, what other people are going through, and then actually be able to work with some people and help them on their journeys with making a plan and just putting something in place to help them be able to have clarity on awareness of what's going on and really what they want to accomplish. So, yeah.
So awesome. So just to back up a little bit so that people who are not familiar with you understand what we're talking about. You went through a period struggling with in your late teens with depression and then mania. That's what was happening? And then at one point when you were 19, you were hospitalized and given the specific diagnosis of what your specific diagnosis was bipolar 1.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what happened. So that was the diagnosis that I got. But before that, it was actually just the depression, because I didn't have any of the mania until 19 years old. So that's what happened with that hospitalization.
It sounded like before you were hospitalized and given that specific diagnosis that you had some kind of intuitive knowing about what was going on with you, in the sense of you were like trying to tell, I mean, you had this knowing that you felt like it was bipolar, maybe because of the history with your uncle. And then you finally got your diagnosis when you were in the hospital.
Yeah, that's really what happened. Is just like, I just felt like there was something more going on. I remember trying to communicate that. And I remember having my psychiatrist and therapist, and it was always, what I was always told is, well, you're working 2 jobs, you're getting good grades, you look good on the outside, you don't seem like you're having a breakdown or whatever it was. And until that point, it's almost like it wasn't real. It didn't seem like there was a possibility that you could have this, and that's really what we're all taught almost when we see like TV shows or movies. When you see a character and they have bipolar, it's like, whoa, like it's very difficult to function or maintain relationships and jobs and just a lot of different things. So that's all that you almost see more on that end. So I remember my doctor's like, no, it's just your depression and all these different things. But that I would notice having a lot more energy and not sleeping and like working 2 jobs, doing this, and then going out and meeting people and partying, and not have just running like this, and really trying to continue to push through it and not really get to the root of what's going on and why is this happening. And I was like, well, my doctor said it's fine, so it's probably fine. But, that's why I think it's important to really do your own work and, do your own research on it and just really get clear on it, and not just trust what someone says, because that's sometimes the case. Is you can go to a lot of different doctors, and, I've heard so many stories from people who've, I was told I had this, or, this diagnosis, and I've been on these different medications. And, there's a lot of it that we can really help ourselves with when we can get clarity on where the trouble is in the different areas of our lives and start to break that down, and either reevaluate your relationships or where you're putting yourself with your time, your environments, what your habits, and why you're doing the things you're doing, and just question that instead of just, let me just take my medicine, or let me just go to my appointment, where you really know you're not making any progress.
We have to be our own health advocates. I mean, I feel this way. My background is more in physical, physical medicine, naturopathic medicine, functional medicine. But I think the theory still applies, which is we cannot just trust people in the white coats that have the medical degrees to tell us what is or what is not wrong with us and give us the course of action. We have to be our own health advocates, whether it's mental health or physical health or spiritual health. We all have an inner knowing, and we and our ability to tap into what we know and what we can discover and what we can learn, as you say, through research, through introspection, through monitoring ourselves, through, reflection, journaling. You mentioned all of these things in your book. And you also mentioned multiple times in your book how we are not taught these types of skills as humans, as children, as people. We're not taught any of these skills. And so you were really forging a path for yourself of discovery.
And yeah, when you say that, especially when you bring up the point of not being taught these skills or anything like this, I feel like it's almost like you're taught the opposite, to just present the best version of yourself. And it's almost like you're making people uncomfortable when you want to get into, whether you're having a bad day or, you're grieving something or something happened in your life, no matter what it is, on what kind of level of traumatic experience it was, wanting to get into these conversations. And that's really what I started to do, because for so long, I didn't even have the awareness. I just knew I'm not happy. And I just the way I spoke to myself was a big player in that game of telling myself, well, you're stupid, or you just need to it's your fault. This is on you. Like, no one's going to care. No one wants to talk about these things. Just distract yourself, go over here, do this, try to it's just run away from it, and then it'll go away. And that's really honestly what made it worse in my case. So really deciding either I'm going to keep repeating the same patterns. And that's what I noticed. And also in relationships as well, it shows that. So when I would leave either like a friendship or a romantic relationship, whatever it was, these patterns of feeling how I was feeling inside myself, like I'm going to have to carry different traumas around with me that I never felt comfortable talking about. So when you're talking about sexual abuse and going through rape, what happened, like in my case, and not wanting to talk about it, and then finally feeling like I can, and then being shut down, or, it makes you feel like, well, then what's the point of even trying to do the work if you're going to be looked down on, or you're going to make people feel uncomfortable and no one even wants to get into the conversation. So what do you do anyway? So that was a hard thing that I really had to teach myself.
So what was the moment? What was the moment? Because you talk a lot about, in fact, there's a whole chapter in your book about stigma, which is this huge like layer of a wall that just kept you from sharing and telling and exploring and being vulnerable. Like, what was the moment, or what was the time frame or circumstances that you finally decided to break through that stigma and just say, I have got to cross over this wall. I've got to go through it. What happened?
Yeah. So I remember being like, having a couple of friends invite me to this conference, and it was a personal development type of conference that was happening. And I've never done stuff like that. I really didn't read anymore. I definitely didn't listen to podcasts. I didn't listen to any YouTube videos. I didn't really do anything to do work on myself. Gratitude, meditation, wasn't even really working out that much anymore. So I remember going there and just being around different people who were having different businesses or starting different businesses or talking about what they loved and enjoyed. I was never really in rooms where conversations were around, how you got to where you were, or what you really enjoy, what the passions are and what you're doing. So I remember thinking, what is it that I like to do? And what is it that I enjoy? Because I feel like I never really thought about that. So looking at the qualities that I have, that I am proud of, and that you can work on. So really being able to get into, and then go to different events and also meet other people. So getting into talking about their stories. And that's how mental health came up as a topic. And that's when I remember actually sharing about my experiences with, going into the hospital and then going back into working there. And I decided that I wanted to start telling, I was like, I'm going to start telling a little bits of pieces of the story, but I don't want to get into like the whole thing. So I remember making some videos and just kind of starting doing that. But what really encouraged me to do that is just being around other people who were very comfortable being vulnerable. And that made me I felt very uncomfortable going into these kinds of rooms, and it actually helped me grow, because I was able to actually meet different people who were people that are good for you, instead of people who, people that I was used to being around, where it's like, let's go out, let's drink, let's get blackout drunk, or, try this, or, let's do ecstasy, or fucking whatever and, stuff like that, where it's literally not productive. It's a distraction.
Right.
So getting around people who are pushing me to find out why are you doing those things, or what you really pushing you out of that. So that's really the start of it.
That's
Changing my environment. That's what it was.
That's so interesting because, I'm sure you've heard the expression that says you are a combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so,
yes.
And so by,
and that's really what it was, is changing that.
And you start to get exposed to like all these new ways of being and communicating and bravery and vulnerability, and like people like living out loud and in an expansive way. And you're like, oh, this is allowed. This is cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was very new to be around that, because I know for the longest, when you spend, and especially with stigma, when you're wanting to talk about your own experiences, but you feel like you're going to be judged, you're going to be criticized. And, whether it's in like the workplace or around new people you meet, and now that's really what I am, is so open with it. It's completely different from how I used to be. And what I came to realize is that there's different people you're going to come across who you don't know their experiences or their story, or maybe if they had a really close relationship with someone who also has a diagnosis or had a diagnosis or something with bipolar, and it was a very, very difficult relationship. You don't know if there's been really bad history with that. So for someone like me, being so open with it can be triggering for someone else who has a really bad experience, or maybe they felt like they couldn't help someone close to them. Like they're feeling guilty, and like they've given up on someone, and now I'm very open about it. That's what I have respect for. And I used to, before, I'd be like, okay, they're judging me or they're criticizing you, but really it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
It's their experience and their story that you're sharing a part of yours. So really not taking things personal, and just, trying to find, the ways in which you can connect on that level. So I think that's a big part of it.
That is really, that's just really resonating with me about as humans, we walk around thinking that it's all about me. It's all about me. And in reality, 99% of it has nothing to do with you, right? Everybody's like their own. My analogy is, pinball machine.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with what a pinball machine is? The silver ball. I feel like everybody
Yes.
is a silver ball inside of a pinball machine.
Yeah.
and the machine is the world, and we're the ball, and we're rolling around. We're just bing, 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 going off all the sides, and everything is, we're reacting, we're triggered. And it's like, it has nothing to do with the other person. I mean, you can, like you said, you could be saying something that is a trigger for that person, but that person is being triggered by a past experience that they had. And it's not personal to you. Yeah. That's amazing that you're realizing all of this.
Yes. Yeah. And no, and that's what caused a lot of problems for me, especially in relationships, or even trying to meet new people, thinking, okay, they don't like me, or they think this about me, or, when someone doesn't, if you're someone who is impatient, and like still have impatience when people, they don't respond right away, or they didn't answer, or they don't, they think this of me. And then it goes into this whole cycle. And getting to the extreme with that is what I love that you talk about, where you bring that analogy, the pinball analogy, of you're just like bonking out and you're going around edges and you're hitting all these things. And then you're just thinking, well, this thing is doing this to me, and it's this, and it's this. And it's really, it's looking at the things that you can control, and that you can, how you respond back to it. Cause I spent so long reacting to things and forming different conclusions that weren't even real yet, and just really letting that ruin my
Mm-hmm.
day and just really impact my mood. And a lot of it was very much that I created and in myself.
That's amazing. I'm curious on how you realize that. I mean, I know you went to school for psychology, and I know you've read a ton of books, and I know
Mhm.
you've probably done a lot of therapy. But like, so was it a combination of those things where you started to
Mhm.
realize about, and you talk about this in the book, about your mindset, that you had to have a mindset shift about so many different things. But like, was it a combination of those influences?
Yeah, so it was a combination of all of those things. And I think really a lot of it too was just journaling too, or just writing out how I was feeling and then trying to look at that. So, because I'm such a
Mm-hmm.
visual person, so when I can write out maybe like, okay, here's the relationships I have right now in my life, and here's, how I typically spend my days or my time doing these things or going to these places. And then, just even what I was doing with, how much I'm drinking, or am I working out, or what am I doing for myself to, and then how mad I stay with things, right? When something happens, like with me
Mm-hmm.
getting hacked, for example. See, if this happened years ago, I probably couldn't even do this interview. I'd be like, no, I can't even talk to you because I can't, I'm hacked and I have my accounts and I'm falling apart and I can't do it. I probably would have not even been able to do this. And it really would have ruined probably a whole week for me. But
Yeah.
now learning, like you said, the mindset shift that happens with looking at, how these different things happen, and, what you can't go back and change it, but what can you do moving
Mm-hmm.
forward? You could potentially, maybe get your accounts back, maybe not. But looking at the bright side of it is, what are the benefits of, you're going to make a new account, and now, you're going to, you can still go back and have those other relationships and those other contacts that you have. But, really changing and just a lot of it too is the way that you talk to yourself. So instead of, I spent a lot of time being very hard on myself because that was the language that I was used to being around in our relationships that were really abusive. So, and if
Mm-hmm.
anyone listening to this has had a past with that, of like, maybe narcissistic relationships or abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, or any kind of abusive relationship where you really start to take on those what's told to you and you really believe it and you start to repeat it. And then once you can get awareness of that, like, wow, I'm saying this to myself right now. And, when you can, even as silly as it might sound, with practicing gratitude and writing out, here's a list of 10 things I'm grateful
Mm-hmm.
for, or 10 things that you're excited for that are coming up, or things that you've done, or, people that you've met, or just whatever it is. I'm grateful for my phone. I'm grateful for the lunch I had. Like literally just having more of that. When you're allowed to, when you give yourself more of that, and I've been doing this for
Mm.
years, working on this for years. But that's really the differences I noticed is I wasn't getting as upset or angry or irritable by things that everything used to bother me. And when you can start to do that and just give yourself, look at what you can control and what you can change, right? So, and it is a lot of the time, it is easy to get stuck and feel stuck because of the stigma and because of not being able to talk about what you've gone through, or, if you have bipolar or not, or some kind of diagnosis or whatever it is, that you're dealing with, feeling like you can't go to anyone. And then when you do go to certain
Mm-hmm.
people, it's almost worse because it turns into like a joke or something that you feel more uncomfortable about. So, yeah, just looking into the things that you can do for yourself to help you break out of those patterns that you're finally starting to notice.
You start to internalize that, and you talk, what that makes me think about, and what I found really interesting in the book was your relationship with your mom. And when you are sharing the stories of how she was around you and the things she would say, and it was, I will tell you, it was hard to
Mhm.
read. It was hard to read those parts. And like, I really, felt your um just anguish when you were going through it, when you were really going through it before and after you were hospitalized. And I know we had briefly spoke last week about your mom, and you had mentioned that you had worked on your relationship with your mom subsequently. But can you talk a little bit about that, about how it was growing up with her, and how she reacted to you when you were really, really struggling, and how you maybe transformed that later?
Yeah, so that was actually one of my biggest challenges was that relationship because for the longest time when I was struggling, I would be like, well, it doesn't really matter that she's not there for me. I don't need that. I don't need to, have her be as I can find it somewhere else, right? I don't need that. And I feel like when I was younger growing up, when I started to first started struggling with my mental health wise was, around like 15 years old. And then with trying to and going to therapy and starting therapy and getting into that and having her, a lot of it was, coming home from the hospital and, I don't know. I remember because me and my dad were always really close. So he was always the one who I would go to and talk with and actually felt like I could tell him things. And I remember
Mhm.
just with her being like, well, I don't know if you're taking your medicine or you're going to have another breakdown. And just even opening up to her about going through like sexual abuse and having it be like, well, what do you, you're going to have to go and get an IUD now. And this is just, and I really felt like it was me. I'm like, well, that must have been my fault. Like I did something wrong. I could have done something. I feel like I made myself feel like I didn't have control when maybe I really believed the anger coming from her because she was very, very upset and, wasn't supportive for me. And I felt bad about telling other people that because I remember other friends of mine, I was like, wow, like your mom's so great. Like you guys hang out, you go do things together. We don't have that relationship. I don't have that relationship with her and just really try. And then I remember getting into working on that, coming to find that my mom not having that support for her with how like she grew up and within her family of never talking about mental health, never getting into these topics. So when I, with my struggles trying to go through it, just feeling very like shot down and not supported and not believed about it. Like, and it was very sad for me to come home and feel like just after being so traumatized in the hospital of things that I've seen in there to finally feel like I'm safe. Even when I got home, I still fully didn't feel that way to have her being like, well, is she ready to be here? I don't know if she should go back. Like, I don't know if you're going to taking your medicine. And it just felt like nothing I did was ever going to be enough. And I remember just spending so much of my time trying to get her like feel like I wanted her approval or different things like that. And then finally going back and actually doing the work in therapy and being able to connect with her and learn about her experiences and, really be able to see that and actually do the work. And because I never thought that would happen or that would be possible, but that was a big, big problem for me. And I feel like I see that in other people as well who also have diagnosis with bipolar of having issues with family members and how much problem that causes down the road and how it trickles into your other relationships and really, just wanting to do the work on that. So I know that's really what I had to start doing. And I'm very happy that I was able to do that and was able to tell her about the story and actually have her read it and say, come back and say that she's proud and she's happy that I, am brave enough to talk about these things and really, have the podcast and share the story. So, and just be able to help her in different ways. So I'm grateful for the journey, but it was definitely not easy going through that when I felt like I needed that support when I was younger,
Right.
but doing the work to learn more about it was different.
So a question for you, which I couldn't quite understand or I didn't get is, do you feel like your perception of what was going on at the time with you and her was distorted by your disease state? And it was, and the relationship was being tumultuous because of your disease state, or do you think she still was behaving in a less than desirable way because she had limited capacity because of her own childhood trauma? Or is it some combination of both? Like,
I think it's both, because looking back, I remember even telling her this about the book. Like, I was very scared because I'm like, I'm writing this and talking about this, and I want you, like, I want to talk about, the ways that it was for me, but also how I was too. Like, I'm not trying to make it seem like, you're a horrible mother, you weren't ever there for me and all these different things. But also, it was I know how difficult it can be to try to help someone, like how I was, where I was pushing everybody away, and and just really was isolating a lot. And I feel like we're very similar now that I think back to it, because I would always be like, I'm nothing like her, we're not alike. And we really share a lot of similarities. And with how, I guess, when you're faced with different problems, trying to act like nothing's wrong or everything's fine, and I remember just getting, it was a lot more paranoid of no one is there for me, and just feeling like not supported in my own family as much. Just because once I did get that diagnosis and did come home, it was harder, because I remember we never really had that relationship where I felt like where she was someone that I could talk to about different things, or even like, hey, and now I'm very happy now that I am so open about it, because, other people in my family have recently agreed to go into a hospital and actually got a diagnosis of bipolar too. And because of that, I remember my family member came to me and was like thanking me, because now they're able to, and my mom even was coming to me about it. And it wasn't like that before. Like, no one was open about these things or would have these conversations. And I really didn't either. And I also it was I say a combination of the both, because I realized that for me, I was also very unkind to her as well, with the way that I would react back. So it was like a back and forth. And I remember always being like, well, she's the mom, right? Like, she should, try to, apologize or figure out why or what's going on, but she's not. So she doesn't care and all these things. And that's how it was a back and forth thing. And I feel like, finally being able to work through that, that's what I'm happy about now, is that when other people it doesn't even matter if you also have bipolar or whatever it is, if you're struggling, that now we can have these conversations. And everyone else in my family now talks about, well, I went through this, and, I've gone through episodes like similar to this. And it's more common now where we can actually have these conversations. Because before, I can never just feel like I can say, because I felt like I was the only one. I was the only one who it happened to.
struggling.
Yeah. So, and that's why I feel like it was a combination of the both, because of the way that I reacted back to her. And it was a lot, every day was fighting. And we also lived together too. So I feel like it was always just back and forth fighting, and nothing's ever good enough. I'm like, and I always felt like I had to like try to get her approval. And I remember being like, you never say I love you. You never say, because I remember watching one time, like one of my sisters being like, I love you. And like, she wouldn't say it back. And I'm like, and I'd be like, oh, that's just so pathetic. Like, you're begging for her, approval. But in the same way, I was doing the same thing, just in a different way. I wasn't being like, I love you, say it back. I was trying to, keep my,
I need you.
Yeah.
I need you.
Yeah. By trying to push her away, being like, I don't. I have my other friends, I'm friends with their moms, and they ask how I'm doing. They check in on me. But I remember every time I would talk to my dad, and especially when I would drink a lot more, which I don't really do. Like, I still drink, of course, but I don't like, back then it was like 5 days a week, like a lot. And just like calling my dad, like, or crying about it and being like, she never asked how I'm doing. And I feel like that's when it does have an impact on you, and it does bother you, because I would just say it so much. Like, I don't care that she doesn't ask how I'm doing.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. And it's sad, because when, really being able to, and I was always afraid of even going to her and being like, well, this is how I feel, because she's going to shut me down, and she's going to be like, well, and that did happen a few times. But I feel like we always have these fears of how things will go in the conversations. And now, I can actually go to her and talk, and and talk with her and just have her there for moments in my life, like my wedding's coming up, being there, picking out my wedding
Mm-hmm.
dress, literally
Right.
seeing her in tears twice when I tried this dress on, and being able to like
Wow.
hug her and then help her with her and just talk with her and like see her be more emotional. And she never was like that. And I was also the same way. Like, and I would say like, we're nothing alike, but we were very much alike. I would always try to hide emotions, and I have this front, like I'm fine, I'm so strong. But really that's what it comes down to, is vulnerability. And really it allows you to
Yeah.
connect and to help each
I
other.
mean, that's it. I mean, you talk a lot about vulnerability in the book. And I mean, I'm listening to your story as me, how, how after going through what you went through, you are still able to make yourself vulnerable and, and, reach out and foster a relationship with her. I mean, I think I can't certainly speak for all women, but I can speak for myself and say that I had a challenging relationship with my mom. I think that women and their moms, it's inherently challenging, right? I mean, especially if there's lots of other kids in the house and stressors and things, right? And then you put in some mental illness in the mix, and you've got a real fun party. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I connect with you when you're saying how, you kept trying and being vulnerable and knowing that she might shut you down, but you still kept trying. I honestly don't know like how you did that. I mean, to me, it's a very, brave, strong thing you did. And I don't know why I'm like honing in on the mom relationship, but I mean, I think for me, that was just so like relatable. You know what I mean? That whole situation. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just amazed that you're able to just push through it. And it's astonishing, really. How's your relationship with your sisters? They sounded like real nice people in the.
Yeah. So now,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of it stemmed from the relationship with my mom, because it was always, they were always closer. So my sisters and my mom, and then I always felt like I'm the weird one out. And it was always me and my dad. And then my brother was just kind of like he wasn't in like a side or whatever. But I remember just my sisters just like feeling like because I remember it was like back when we were younger, I feel like my mom would, like talk like my three sisters and like talk with them. And then like, if someone does something else or goes, and I would be like, this is so weird. Like I would be like, I don't understand it. I'm like, don't you want all your kids to, be happy, or just, see how they're doing or whatever. And now it's like when one does something, you gang up against each other with the other one. And now it's like, that's how I felt with me when I would come home when I was in college, because I still lived there. And I would come home, and I remember just one time, like literally trying to make macaroni. And I was also
Mm-hmm.
like, and it was also hard being like newly diagnosed, and you're just getting used to, like, I was on still on my medication, the same one that I'm on at the time, but just getting back to normal life. And then also coming to the realization that
Mm-hmm.
all your relationships are very
Yeah.
surface level, and no one really, it's sad to even to feel a lack of support and then have that in your own home. And then I was already on edge with that, so struggling with that, and then going home and then seeing, like, going into the room and then trying to cook and then seeing them all together, and then they're all like looking at me and almost like laughing and stuff, and I'm like, they're talking about me, and and it was hard. And I remember just like crying and being like, it's just a shitty feeling to feel like this. And I remember it was because me and my mom weren't getting along. So they all took her. They were like, it was always like them with her and stuff. And I remember that's kind of how it was. So my dad was always more with me. And I think that would piss my mom off, because he would always be like, stick up for me and be like, well, you don't have to talk to her like this. And he would never yell. Really, he would just like, he would talk, and me and my mom and everyone would be like yelling more. But that's really what it was, is just going through all of that. And I feel like now also, like when I did I moved out, I think I was 20, when I was 22, got my own place. And I think things from that point, we just didn't talk at all, which I feel like almost made me sadder, because at least when we were at home, we would talk, but it was always fighting. And I'm like, but at the same time, I would always this is when I first met Dan, my fiance, and I'd be like, she doesn't ever message me or like text me or ask me how my day is going or anything, but I never did that with her either. So I would always, and I feel like that's what I noticed that's similar about us is she would always call her mom, and they're very close. And she would always talk to her about like her other siblings and be like, well, this one does this and then this and that. But I would do that with my dad, with her, and be like, well, she never talks about me. And he's like, well, she's always asking me how you're doing. And I'm like, well, why doesn't she ask me? And she doesn't care, but I never really did any of it either. And because I felt very rejected from her when I would try to bring up things, and a lot of it was like, you want attention or you're trying to get attention. And I'm like, no, like I want a relationship with you. I want to have that because so many people I know have that. And I have that with my dad, but I wish I had that with you where you would, want to learn more about things. Because I remember now that I actually talk to so many people and work with a lot of people who, are younger and have bipolar, and their parents are coming to me and they're wanting to learn about it. They're wanting to, read my book or read other books. And I'm like,
Right.
I wish you were like that. I want to learn about this. I want to, talk to her more about it. But I feel like maybe and then talking with her about it, I remember she was like, well, I didn't want to bring it up to you or do all this stuff because you would get upset. And we were both like that. So yeah.
I think it's awesome that you have a relationship with her now. And
I
I
know.
know. Oh my gosh. So you mentioned the medication. In your book, you mentioned it's lithium is the medication that's prescribed pretty standard for this. What do you call it? A disorder, an illness? What do you call it?
Disorder. Yeah. So it's bipolar 1. And then I know there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, but the most common one is lithium for bipolar 1.
Okay. And that's the medication you take. And you said that you find it very, very helpful.
Yeah. So with my experience, with my hospitalization, I was 19 years old, and that's where I actually got the diagnosis, bipolar 1, and then was put on lithium. They actually also put me on Risperdal, which is also risperidone, but I'm reading a lot of different books now, and I learned that that's actually a combination that they put different people who have the diagnosis. But I've only ever been taking lithium, and I used to take a lot more when I was back in those years ago. And now I still take one now still. That's like, it's I think 300 milligrams. It used to be like over 1,200 a day.
Wow.
Yeah, over 1,200 a day. And yeah.
So you've titrated down to a really minimal amount?
Yeah. And honestly, what I should have, for me, ever since I came out of the hospital, I was put on court-ordered treatment for a year. So I was at an outpatient clinic. And then after that, I don't really know what happened, but I think my primary care doctor was the one where I would see him and go in and get checked, and they would do your levels. And then, and he just would send the medication to my pharmacy. And I didn't even have a psychiatrist after that either. But now I just found out that he got promoted to some chief medical position. So now I'm going to a new doctor, and I only go in, and you're supposed to go in like maybe at least every 6 months to get your blood taken to see your levels because you can get toxic. There's toxic levels that can be damaging. So you want to like maintain that. But for me, I've only ever gone off this medication one time. And what you see a lot is with people who have the diagnosis, they'll take something, they'll go off, they'll take something, and then and I think that's what really makes a lot of problems, like trying on this thing, going on this thing, and then doing this like back and forth thing. Cause I know for me, like that's what I feel like is when I did go off, I was off. Actually, the only time I ever really went off of it was last year. And I remember I told my fiance, and I remember even telling like my dad and like, I think my mom, I was like, and I remember I was for 3 months. And what I noticed actually is it was so weird. I remember I would just be doing different things and I would just start crying. Like I'd be on a walk and out of nowhere just start crying. And I have not had that. And it was so strange to me because that's a common thing that you see. Cause I'm the kind of person where I think everyone's different and it depends on the person. So, I don't think every single person who has ever had a diagnosis or, with bipolar, they all need to be on medication because you definitely don't. And if it works for you, that's great. If it's not, then find another solution or something else that can help. But for me, I remember I just noticed that in myself and I didn't want to just, test that and be like, well, I'll just, because I eventually would like to, go down or whatever, less dose or whatever it is. But I just stopped taking it for 3 months. And what you see is that it could get worse to the point of where when you decide you're going to go back on it, it's not going to be as effective. So I just decided for me, like what is working well for me is what I'm doing now. So I take the one pill, I do my workouts, I do my gratitude stuff. I read a lot. I do a lot of research. I have changed. My life is completely different from how it was when I was really, really struggling. So that's my experience with the medication. But I've also interviewed other people who also had the diagnosis. This one guy was amazing. He's from England, and I actually read his book as well. And he talks about lithium. He talked about being a stockbroker and going from that to like with the lithium and different things for him and then just, it's so different for every single person and kind of like what they're doing and what works. But I've definitely had people share really bad experiences with it. And then other people share good experiences with it. But yeah,
what happened to the stockbroker?
He went off of it. Like, so how I did, he went off of it like a few times, like he would go on and then go off of it, go on, go off of it. And he just talked about now how he's still, I think he's like me now, where he's on like the low dose now, and he's good. Yeah. He's good. But that's what it is, and that's what I would get sad when I would work with people, and going into the clinic, and then they would, because that's a common thing of when you're doing good, like, I don't need this anymore because.
Right.
And
for sure.
Yeah.
Like one piece of like a whole lifestyle change that you made and that you continue to do. And you mentioned some of them just now. But others in the book, you mentioned like exercising and, just your mindset training and reading. And you've mentioned multiple times the gratitude journaling, and changing your diet. Okay. When you wrote in your book that you were making the Velveeta macaroni and cheese like every day, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, because I love macaroni and cheese and I never eat it anymore, right? Because it's just like, but I was like, oh my gosh, she's eating mac and cheese every day, and what is that doing to her gut, and the gut brain connection, right? And so, what do you have a whole food based diet now, or what do you don't eat it?
Yeah. So I switched that. So I remember literally, I didn't know how to cook anything like at all. Like I couldn't even make scrambled eggs or anything. I would just literally I would eat McDonald's all the time, KFC, like fried chicken like just pasta, boxes of pasta and stuff like this, and just candy. And I definitely did not get my water intake. I drink a lot of soda. And I just cut out. Now I plan out my meals. So I have a board where I'll have not for breakfast. Breakfast is more just like maybe it's like some fruits or some eggs or some cereal or different things in there is kind of what the plan is for that. But then like lunches, I'll have those, dinners. So sometimes I'll do different meal prep services and just eating today it's like broccoli, potatoes, and like chicken from, I think, Flower Child for lunch, which is so good. And now I love it.
I love Flower Child.
Right. I just love eating stuff like that now. And I used to not, because I feel like I would crave all the time. Like I need soda. I need to eat these different foods. And actually I feel so much better now. And I feel like that's definitely contributed with the struggle that I had with bipolar, because that interferes with the balances and the chemicals in your brain and just your levels of irritability, energy, tiredness. So that's what I like to teach people is like, when you can make these little changes And also, again, like for me, a big thing was identifying what are my triggers. And even now, like writing things out, like when I can be so hard on myself for setting, reaching a goal because I do so well, when I'm working or I'm, doing this job and I'm hitting these numbers and I'm going over and I'm doing so good. And then, that what's a trigger, right? So, oh, I'm not, you're not happy with where you are and I feel like that's what I'm always working on and getting clear with that. So before what my triggers were just fighting, arguing with my mom, arguing with my past relationships. So all
Mm,
my past relationships, fighting every single day, arguing all the time. And then sleeping. I would barely sleep or I would sleep way too much, getting clear on what these things are. And then when I'm not feeling
right.
well or doing well, what's going on or what am I thinking about, and then writing it out to have awareness of it, because that's what's really helped me. And that's why I love that you bring up the diet thing, because that's really changed. And I remember even sharing it with my mom too, and being like, like the way we grew up, like, I mean, we're all Italian, but it's everything was from like a box. And, and now like she loves it because my fiance cooks like everything. So he would cook some stuff for her and she like loves trying these new foods. So, I mean, I think everyone can benefit from it, especially if you've had like struggling with mental illness or bipolar or whatever it is, just changing that. Hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like we have this, there's so many similarities of what you're saying between mental health and just physical health. I mean, it's all affected by this hygiene, this health hygiene is really what it's like it's going to help everything. It's going to help your mental state. It's going to help. And it all affects each other, right? What we eat is affecting how we sleep, and how, if we're tired, we're going to want to eat a certain way. And, you know,
Hmm.
it all is just a spiral, right? We can be spiraling up, into in a good way, or we can be spiraling down. And, yeah, I think that's so interesting. And people, you think about the epidemic of like depression
Hmm.
in the world, but the United States, and like that antidepressants are like one of the number one prescribed medications. And it's like, what would it be like if we just took, and I'm not saying depression isn't real or that people shouldn't take medication, but what I am saying is if physicians first said, okay, let's do some health hygiene. Let's look at how you're sleeping. Let's look at your stress levels. Let's look at your nutrition intake. Let's look at your,
Hmm.
do you feel safe? Do you feel, are you whatever, you know what I mean? All of these things. And if we, Jane, I don't know, I'm just coming up with that in the moment, but like, how much would that improve our life and our outlook, just by doing that? I mean, you've been able to virtually
Hmm.
minimize your symptoms and your medication use by the
Hmm.
diligent effort that you're making on a daily basis. I mean, you have to work for it. This is like a job, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the health hygiene, because I feel like that's something that I would try to implement too. Like I remember going back and working where I was a patient and meeting so many different people and like hearing about their lives and their relationships and seeing these common factors. Of a lot of it was what I went experienced. So being like, okay, what can we change here? Or what can we do here to make these improvements? Because I feel like we're so focused on what we can't change. Like a lot
Right.
of people are like, oh, well, if maybe you're someone who's married and you're living with your ex-husband and you're like, well, I have to stay here because of finances and I can't leave and I hate him. And, he's always, bringing up different things, but I can't get away from it. But thinking about what can you do to put a plan in place to where you can work on that and just make it that, because that's what my focus has shifted onto because that was all I focused on, of this sucks. This is, my mom isn't there for me. She hates me. She's never going to care about me. I don't feel like I'm close to anyone in my family. I don't feel like I have that close of relationships with people and all of this stuff. But what can you do to make changes to that or remove yourself from the situation to, if you live in a bad situation, what can you do to get away from that or get out of that situation or make it better and just try to look at more of the solutions. And that's really what I try to do to bring more to the table in my podcast from other people who, also have a diagnosis of bipolar or maybe know someone who does, or they have expertise in that area of like, what have you seen that's been helpful? And that's why I love that you bring up the whole health hygiene, because that's something I was never asked. Like, I wish that when I was in the hospital, I was asked, like, okay, did you eat today? Good. Did you take your medicine? Yes. Did you go to group? It's never like, what are you doing when you leave here? Do you have somewhere to go? Okay. Like, are you in school? Like, are you working? What are you trying to do? What's your passion? Getting to know the person. Like, do you work out? Like, what's your diet like? Like, what kinds of things are you, are you even interested in changing that? Getting to know the person, because most likely that's why these patterns keep repeating. Because I remember I was so like shocked that I've only had one hospitalization in my life. And I met people in there who were like, I've been in here 10 times. I've been in here 19 times. And I'm like, wow, because part of it is on the person. You need to be willing to make the changes and do the work as well. But also when you're in a system that almost kind of rewards you just for doing nothing. Like, okay, you show up and you take your medicine and you come to your appointments. That's it. That's it. You're really basically teaching people that you're fine where you are. Even if you're not doing that well, you're still like, okay. So I love that you bring that up of really looking at the overall picture of the your overall health and how that impacts your relationships, how you think, how you treat people, how you see the world. Because when I used to walk into rooms, I automatically thought that everyone was against me automatically. And that really prevented me from connecting with people at all because I thought that way. And now that I've worked on it and shifted it, when I go into rooms, I'm excited to meet people and connect with them. And I don't have this impression that everyone in the room is against you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that, again, it applies to mental health. It applies to physical health. It's like any garden, right? It's like any living, breathing thing. If you don't nurture it and give it high quality nutrition, air, sunlight, love, kind energy and words and affection, it will wither and die. And people just think that our bodies are perfect and that they're just supposed to work. But it's like, I used to say this when I used to give health talks about nutrition. It's like, we are Ferraris. We are Ferraris. I mean, some of us are Porsches, some of us are Ferraris, some of us are Cadillacs, whatever. But no matter what kind of, high-end driving machine we are, we have to have tune-ups. We have to check the brakes. We have to get high-quality gas. We should keep it washed. We should keep it in a garage. Don't do this. Nobody, I mean, not nobody, but it's really the minority. I would say 10% of people. Now, this is also like it can be a little bit of an elitist issue in the sense of, I'm an extremely privileged person. So I have access to all kinds of education. I have access to, exposure, to go to workshops, to, read the books, to take the coursework, to get the degree, to go on the retreats, right? And I have access to, buying the supplementation and, going to the restaurants that have clean paleo food, all of these things. So I have to be careful and say with what the information they have and the access to information and resources, right? And it's like, when you know better, you do better, right? And so I just want to just make a note of that, because I am aware that some people just don't have access. They don't, there's, in the middle of America, there's a food desert, they don't even have access to fruit, high quality fruits and vegetables, or even knowledge, about, how our choices and our lifestyle affect our mental, emotional, and physical health. So, I love that you, as a young person, are taking this initiative upon yourself and really making it your life's mission to like optimize, and given a
Mm-hmm.
precious, meat suit, given this precious gift, and to
Yeah, and that's why I love that you bring that up, because especially, with what information you do have, and being able to tap into that and then see, just get awareness on what it is that you're trying to work on, or what it is that is causing you the most struggle and pain, that you can either have that written down or understand what it is and really be able to work through these things. So I think that's huge, especially at what you talk about. It's how it relates to your mental health, impacts all of these different things, and it trickles down to it. So
Yeah.
that's why I feel like I spend so much time on this. And then even, being able to work with other people and help them on that is something that has really brought me a lot of joy in doing that, because I feel like there's so many people, we go out to, different people who, have a medical degree or they are a doctor, but, I feel like it's different when you have the lived experience like that, because you can say like, hey, all these, different medications you're talking about, I've been on those, or I've had these experiences, or I feel the same way you feel when you sit there and you talk about wanting to stop all your medication and not wanting to do this, or, getting easily upset or feeling like you don't have a lot of friends who you can relate to and talk about these things with. So that's really what it is about. And that's really what I tried to share in my story of just, sharing more, getting more vulnerable with that side of it, of what the reality looks like, instead of just how you seem on the outside to everyone around you.
Right. That's not doing anybody any good to walk around in a mask and pretend everything is okay. It's so odd, isn't it? It is really odd. I've been paying attention to when people lately, this is one thing I'm working on, when people ask me, how you doing? To not do the automatic. You mentioned this, not do the automatic. Oh, I'm fine. I'm good. Like to really, like they're asking me, I'm going to just take a second or two and actually scan real quick and give, somewhat of an honest answer. Like, actually, this is what's on my mind right now. Or gosh, I was just, or, whatever it is, like to be honest, pretend everything is okay. So, I mean, I'm 51 and I'm just starting that whole process of not doing the auto. And you mentioned that this is what's bringing you joy, is educating others and talking about these things and being vulnerable. And you've had this, you've started a podcast. Was this like 2 years ago? This is before the book?
Yeah. So podcast was like 2.5 years ago.
Oh yeah. You right before COVID, right? In January of 2020. Wasn't that when you did it?
Yes. Yeah.
And boy, so you've really dedicated a lot of time to increasing awareness of the challenges that come with mental, well, I don't know, disorders, with stuff.
Yeah. And that's really, honestly, I feel like it's helped me a lot too, because I remember when I started doing it, just the more interviews that I've done and, talking to over like 100 different people has helped me be able to figure out more of what's worked, and a lot of it is different people's stories. So seeing people who've gone from being homeless, addicted to drugs, to now opening up treatment centers and, doing different things for people, and going from, again, like being, whether it's your hospitalization or struggling with anxiety, and talking about the parenting side of it. But now it's a lot more, and I feel like that's the thing, is as long as you start what you're doing, that's the biggest thing, is starting the work, or starting the project, or starting your book, or whatever it is that you're trying to do to help others through your story. Because that's the thing, is we all have a story that is a story that we are like unsure if we want to share it or not. And usually those are the ones that are the most impactful. And, just encouraging people to do that more if they're comfortable, because if they've done the work with it and wanting to say, here's something that happened to me or, impacted my life or, an event that you went through, whether it's like losing someone close to you or, whatever that was that you experienced and how that really helped, what from that lesson can you pull to give to other people? So that's really what I try to do is just, especially with bipolar, because, whether you're talking about but trying to work bipolar and working. And now it's like, I don't even care anymore. If I were to go somewhere else and do, a job and I'm open about it, I don't let it affect me anymore like I do, because, if someone wants to say something like, it's, the way I look at it is these different things are temporary. You don't have to stay in one place forever. You don't have to stay here forever. Take what you can and learn. And that's what really the podcast has taught me, is learning from other people's stories and then having other people, reach out and share the impact that that's had. And then that's really what encouraged me to publish the book, because I had the story kind of like started a little bit, but I remember after talking to so many people and they're like, oh, I've published 9 books, like 5 books. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, wow. And then they ask you, and I feel like that's again, getting out of your comfort zone and getting around other people who've done the things that you're like, I don't know if I should do it, or right. See, like, all of us.
Dude, I'm impacted by you right now. I'm like, dang, maybe I have a story to share. I mean, it's amazing. Yes. So you have a pod. What is next for you? What is on the horizon? What's your...
Yeah. So, and I also work with people too, like one-on-one for just specifically with like bipolar. So around like where they are currently and more with like living well, like solutions and kind of putting a plan together for that. So that's really what I gotten into, actually at the end of this year here, started doing that. And I think for that, honestly, again, like, is just to continue learning more about it. And what's next for that is actually changing. So the podcast is staying the same. Nothing's going to be changing with that. It's just going to be a new name and new cover. And that's because of when I had this, it was actually originally crooked illness. And this goes to another point, right? It was crooked illness and it's master your mental. And now I'm going to be changing it. But the reason is I feel like we always get so caught up in starting things because it has to be perfect. Or what if I change it? And now it's like, it doesn't matter, because now that's the thing, is I'm changing the name and then the cover, but I'm saying the message is the same. So it's a lot of it. I'm wanting to get more into it with my experiences, because I've done a lot of the interviews and doing more of the interviews and bringing that back too, but just around topics with bipolar. So even like bringing like my fiance on and doing like an episode on like relationships, and for people of how do you maintain, or what works with relationships, like what issues come up with it and how to work through that, and like what does a plan look like. So just bringing other people on and then not everyone has to have a diagnosis of bipolar, but whether they know someone who does, or they're like, they have some kind of expertise on it, hearing from them to be like, here's what I've seen in, I don't know, clients I worked with, or I talked with someone who was talking about keto. So keto as a diet and what she's seen it do in people that she's helped with bipolar. So see, like that's really what it's all about. It's basically all about how to living well despite bipolar. And then really, again, like smashing the stigma with that.
I love it.
So, and now it's like, I remember I used to be so like, I'd be like, I don't want to say what it's really about, or my book, I don't want to say. I remember like I was at a dinner one time and someone asked me, and it was like this like 10-person dinner and everyone got quiet. And I was like, it's about mental health. And now I'm like, I literally will say like, it's about my memoir, like bipolar disorder, like in the hospital working, and I don't care anymore. So
saying that, Paris, it's so much more of a powerful statement when you say, oh, it's a book about mental illness, compared to it's my story about my experience with bipolar disease and being to whatever, like beyond that, just optimization of my health. I mean, that is so powerful, impact so many more people. And, when people are connection. And so
thank you. Yeah. And see, that's what it is when, because I remember I actually met someone in an airport like that because I was in an airport and I started talking about it. And then, someone I connected with was like, oh, wow, someone I know just got this diagnosis. And I was like, wow. And then see, so that's what it is like being and just asking people what their story is and just getting more out of your comfort zone and then starting these conversations because that's what allows other people to feel comfortable and being like, wow, like here's this. And then, even recently, I feel like a lot of the new people I've met somehow in some form, like this one lady I met, she's like, yeah, I'm in PA school and I just got a job offer. And literally where she got a job offer is the place that I was taken before the hospital. And she's like, oh my gosh, talking to you right now and just hearing you share this, like I'm actually, because I was considering not doing it, but hearing like you share what would have made a difference and like getting to know your story. So I feel like, see, like that, what if I didn't say that? Oh, I'll just talk about, what something else because I don't want to no, like, it's like, I'm sorry, but if you write a book about it, like, and you can't, you're like afraid to say it. So, but yeah, and that goes to everything, but that's the thing. And that's not to say you have to be vulnerable everywhere with everybody at all times. So the best place to send people to is, so since I usually say Instagram and that one was hacked and then that's connected to the Facebook, but I do have, it's the masteringyourmental.com is my website now where everything's on there. And then also the book is Crooked Illness on it's on Amazon. So it's there as well. And then I'm going to be so once you can get the podcast, it's on Apple Podcast and Spotify and all those other places. So you can get it there. And then, so if it, applies to you and you want to learn more about, my story and kind of like what works for bipolar, like what are some solutions or what's been helpful for other people or myself in, managing it, like different things like that, then you can subscribe there. And yeah, that's pretty much the best places right now is on podcast Master Your Mental and on the websites masteringyourmental.com.
And I'll link all of those in the show notes so people have the exact address. Paris, thank you so much. You're so interesting to talk to and you're so inspiring. And yeah,
Joanna.
I think you're helping a lot of people.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I feel like I can talk to you forever. This has been such a good conversation.
We're going to have to get together in person sometime. We'll go have lunch at Flower Child.
Yes, our favorite place. We do 100%. But I'm so excited. I can't wait for this to come out. And I'll definitely make sure that I continue to share that and just continue doing this work. But thanks again for having me on. It was awesome talking to you. Absolutely amazing.
Thanks, Paris. Have a good night. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.